This week, survival expert and instructor Mike House returns back to the podcast to talk about resilience. Now, he was spurred on to investigate this further by the recent impacts of COVID, but also, interestingly, by the growing requests during this period of time from his clients who are CEOs and senior leaders who wanted Mike to help them sort of get more resilience into their workforce. This got Mike thinking, and as a result of that, he went out and interviewed a whole range of people to start to see some of the emerging patterns and how they lined up with his own beliefs. And he's put that together into a recent little book called Unshakable. In this conversation, one of the things that I found super interesting was just diving into the different definitions of resilience and working out how they play out when you sort of play out those different definitions. Particularly listen for when we started to delineate the difference between resilience and adaptability. There's a really interesting part in the conversation around that. Mike puts forward that a big part is acknowledging that we are resilient and we are resilient humans. As humans, we are resilient. And this in and of itself then starts to build an amount of trust, not just in ourselves, but collective trust. And we really started to talk about the impact of that, particularly about instead of being a special person inside of a normal society, being a normal person inside of something special that's way bigger than us. As always, chatting to Mike is a real treat. You know, from his unique perspective as a survival expert, you can really feel his depth of thought and the way he thinks about things as we go through this conversation. He's really good fun. And there was another really great little point which I'll leave you with, which is, as Mike puts forwards, calmness is contagious, same as any other emotion. So enjoy, Mike. Hello, welcome back to WA Real. I'm your host, Bryn Edwards. Today I have the great pleasure of welcoming back Mike House. Mike, welcome back to the show.
G'day, Bryn. Great to be back.
Yeah, you were episode number 16.
Is that right?
Yeah.
And how many are you up to now?
This will be 192, I think, or
wow.
2, yeah.
Wow. Well done. That's a good bit of longevity in this kind of world.
It is. It is. It does actually make me think about the journey from then to here. But yeah, and the last time we talked a lot about your background as a survival instructor and surviving versus thriving and stuff like that. But I gather recently, and this is why I thought it would be a great conversation to have, you've been diving into resilience.
Well, sort of.
Sort of.
So I think what I need to do about resilience is reframe it a little bit, I think.
Yeah.
Because
that's why I thought this would be a fun conversation.
I reckon I don't think we've played it well. And particularly over the last 12 months. COVID's the obvious conversation when it comes to resilience. It's had an impact globally. It's had an impact on pretty much every human on the planet in some way, shape or form. Everything from loss of life to change of plans.
Yes.
So there's a massive continuum. I loved what someone said, and I can't remember who it was, but somebody made the point last year in response to somebody saying we're all in the same boat. They said, no, we're not. We're all in the same storm. We're in very different boats. And I thought that nuance was really quality. Because, here in Western Australia, compared to the rest of the planet, we've had a very, very light brush of this thing personally and economically.
Yes.
Compared to pretty much everywhere else on the globe.
Yeah.
That said, it's had significant impact here. It's not like it's gone by with no ripples.
Yeah, I have this discussion with my mother and father, who are obviously in the UK, and they've had 3 sets of lockdowns. And I had to sort of explain, it's completely different to that. But we've had about 12 months of lock-in.
Yes. Which
brings a different level of difference.
Absolutely, and especially given that we're, especially here, the most isolated capital city on the planet.
Anyway.
If you can't leave the village, then the risk is you become a bit insular, maybe. It's also got its big upside, right? We're isolated, and so the impact's been small.
Yeah.
But back to resilience, I think the way that game has been played over the last 12 months. So when COVID first hit, a lot of my longer term clients got hold of me very, very quickly and said, Mike, can you come and do stuff with us and our team about resilience? We feel like we need more of that right now. And I think that there's a number of problems with that as a proposition. So problem number one is that it ignores the fact that if you're a human being, you are resilient. I think we sort of undersell that. You know, it's absolutely built into our DNA as humanity that we are resilient. You know, time and time again through our human history, we've had our back to the wall either individually or collectively, and we've gone, okay, well, let's find a way. And it's not easy and it's not pleasant, but we just crack on and navigate our way through things. And sometimes that's really successful and sometimes less so, but it's genuinely a part of us. So I think to not acknowledge that diminishes just how capable we are. The second thing is that
it's a really key foundation stone, isn't it?
I reckon.
Because it puts a level of confidence and capability. I was going to say strength, but I was retracted from that. You know, solid capability in there to start with.
Yes.
That we can draw from.
Yes.
Rather than, well, I'm just pathetic.
Yeah.
I've got no resilience.
And I've seen a lot of people pointing at various chunks of the population and saying, look, you know, those young people, they're just not resilient these days. You know, this group of people, whatever it is, you know, they're not resilient. And fundamentally, I think it's BS. You know, we are all resilient. Let's just acknowledge that. Now, can we be more resilient? Sure. Can we build skill sets around that? Sure. Can we test it and build it? Sure. But we've all got it, and our default when our back's to the wall is find a way.
Yeah.
And I think COVID, one thing it did in spades was prove that. You know, the amount of adaptation that humans have done in the last 12 months has been stunning.
Yeah.
You know, business models have shifted, people's personal interactions have shifted. We've just individually and on wholesale, large scale kind of capability just pivoted in all kinds of ways.
Yeah.
And we've just done it. You know, it hasn't taken some expert to come and teach us how to be resilient. We've gone, all right, we need to find a way to work from home. Let's do it.
So in that, how do you delineate resilience versus adaptability?
So I think resilience, they're really tightly coupled. It's a good question.
Yeah.
I think adaptability is a mindset that's inherently fairly light. So we're not too tightly coupled to our expectations and our plans. And I think, you know, the most stark version, I guess, of that is the Buddhist framework that says, you know, if you want to be unhappy, then compare yourself to others and have expectations. And then, you know, if you're into most of the known world, that's exactly what we do. We have massive expectations and comparisons are rife. So that I think is the extreme of adaptability, because it's like, whatever happens, and we'll just go with the flow.
Yeah.
The further we come towards, you know what, I have a heap of expectations and comparisons of myself with myself in a past or future form, with other people around me, with industry benchmarks, with learning benchmarks, with, you know, various other forms of status, then I think adaptability in that setting comes down to how lightly can we hold on to our expectations. I think they're a very powerful thing. You know, again, it's a fundamental part of human history, is that we set often really unrealistic expectations. I reckon we can drag that out of my head into reality, and I'll assemble this tribe and we'll go get it done. Yeah. And sometimes it's just like, really, what were you thinking? That's outrageous. We've done it. So at one level, expectations are a super powerful thing, but they're also really dangerous. You know, we used to say in survival land, when I was teaching people those skills, expectations are actually what kills people. You know, if you're lost or stranded somewhere, that in itself isn't a problem. But if your expectation was to be somewhere else, the chances that you'll rush to try and get there and in that process will kill yourself is really high.
Right.
You've got to be able to go, okay, that's not serving us now, let's drop it and change the benchmark. And I think that's what, in my mind, adaptability is.
Yeah.
Resilience is more about when we're under duress, it's our capability to keep showing up and to keep trying. And obviously they go hand in hand, rather than just accept that all is lost. And there's some key transition points in there. You know, I think there's moments of impact where we experience something that really rattles our cage, and it takes a while, sometimes a short while, sometimes a long while, to find that place again of, we've got this, let's get out and have another go.
Yeah. So it's interesting that, you know, listening to you answer that question, because it just came up. So there's a real sense of adaptability being how tight or loose you are with your expectations, and then resilience about almost the impact of the change, the consequence of that to our being.
Yes,
is the words you used.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, it's interesting how those things are viewed. I had a fascinating conversation with a really delightful Maori woman last week, and she was saying in the Indigenous community, resilience is not seen as a positive thing. It's that because it speaks to, we are constantly backs to the wall fighting our way out of something. Yeah. And it's not seen as a positive state, whereas for a lot of businesses, they go, that's a really desirable thing that we want to get hold of.
Because you're constantly in that fight, flight, sympathetic, stressed out, nervous, anxious state, having to deal with the impact of stuff in the outside world. Yeah. Because we'll come to your research in a minute.
So a couple of other loops, I think, in that resilience picture. So one is it's fundamentally human to be resilient.
Yes.
The second thing is that I think we have overplayed it at an organisational kind of level, where people, the request that people were making, can you come and teach our staff how to be resilient, I think is a little bit akin to me fronting up to the start of an ultra marathon and on the start line calling my personal trainer and saying, mate, I'm just about to do this marathon, can you help me get fit? Him turning up in that moment is of zero use. I am as fit as I am, and I either can or I can't get through it. Yeah. Him turning up is actually just highlighting the fact that my capability isn't what it should be. And I was saying to CEOs and others who were asking me for that work, what you want to be doing right now is giving your people the message you've got this, not giving them the message that you haven't got this and you need all these tools and capabilities.
Extra bits to put inside of you to make you feel like you can do the thing.
They've got what they've got. Help them to feel confident in that, not tell them that they're lacking. There's a time and a place. Like, I think around now in Western Australia, that's a great conversation to revisit, where the bulk of the impact has passed. Let's spend a bit of time looking in the rear vision mirror and go, okay, so what went well there? Where were our pressure points? How adaptable were we?
Let's put hands up. Who freaked out and went to the supermarket to buy a shit ton of bog roll? Right. Oh, it was me. Right. Well, maybe we need to have a chat about that.
That's right. Yeah. So, in hindsight, let's refine that a little bit. That's a great conversation to have. Yeah. But in a moment of pressure, I think it's probably the worst conversation to have.
Is there... Because the thing that comes through for me, when you tell me, we're getting CEOs and senior leaders come in saying, can you help our staff with resilience? Yeah. The other thing that screams out to me is, and this is where I think it'd be fun, because I think this is what you've said in terms of, tinkering around with the definitions of impact and what people think it is and it isn't. Yes. Is that what screams out to me is when a CEO goes, can you come and put this resilience thing into my staff? Yeah. Why? Possibly because the CEO wants the organisation to stay roughly the same.
Yeah, often that's the request.
And and I find it interesting, this word resilience, because it can have different functional meanings to different people. Some productive, some less so.
Yes.
What have you seen around that?
Around the different definitions or working definitions? So I think one of the least useful ones is that if you're resilient, it won't be hard.
Oh, right. Yeah.
That we'll kind of have an easy time of it. There'll be all this disruption, and we'll just sail on through.
Right.
And
yeah,
to
that's
me,
super unproductive, isn't it?
To me, that's like saying, if I'm courageous, I'll never be afraid. So actually, that's nonsense. You only need to be resilient if it's really hard.
That's route one to a nervous breakdown.
Exactly.
Running that narrative in your head.
If I'm courageous, it's because I'm crapping myself. You know, if I'm not crapping myself, courage doesn't apply, you know? So people sometimes say to me, I certainly pre-COVID did a lot of quite large stage public speaking at conferences and things, and people would go, you must be really courageous to do that. And I actually find that environment deeply energising, and I love it. I actually don't have a fear of public speaking in the way that many people frame that. And I go, no, for me it doesn't take courage, and that narrative isn't actually useful.
Yeah.
Courage is coupled to fear. It has to be.
Yes.
Otherwise it's not courage.
Yeah.
Resilience has to be coupled to hardship and duress, because otherwise why do you need it?
Yeah.
So we may have those things in the bank. You know, I can have a bank of courage, I can have a bank of resilience that I may or may not be drawing down.
Yeah, depending on what you're meeting in the environment.
But the deployment of them is inherently under pressure, and I think we kind of, the least useful definitions of those things are we assume that if we have that, we're not going to encounter this.
Yeah.
And that causes us to gloss over a whole heap of things. We don't have the conversations about the duress and the fear. We go, oh, it's all right, resilience, just crack on. Everything will be fine.
Just crack on, yeah.
Get on with it.
Yeah.
You know, there's no need to be talking about how hard it just got. Just get on with it. We're resilient, right?
Exactly.
And I think that's really unhelpful and is probably part of the mechanism that's led to, you know, we're seeing lots of stuff coming through now about the mental health impacts of COVID, and particularly for workplaces, and how much of a ski ramp we're facing there around mental health issues in workplaces that I think are both individual and collective. You know, we've got teams that are sort of like, you know.
I think we're underplaying. Oh, I think I've mentioned this on the podcast. I appreciate, especially from some of the people I spoke to last year, that we've all had a bit of trauma. We've all had trauma in our life, big or small. Let's just say it is. Right? There's no register, and that has promoted a traumatic response to pressurised situations that may or may not be productive, and that's our own work to sort out. But at the same time, I'm fast getting to the place. My emerging hypothesis is that the increase in mental health issues is an appropriate response to strange things in the environment. Now,
say more about that. Because an appropriate response is a really interesting frame. A lot of people. So
actually, we can draw on what you've mentioned earlier on. If you take your premise that humans are resilient, right? And we delineated resilience and adaptability from managing expectations and managing the impact of something else. Then sticking those two together, by definition, as humans, we are impacted. We are impacted beings with the outside world, right? So therefore, that impact, the nature of that impact will show up. So therefore, actually you're really helping me articulate this with what we're talking about. Therefore, rather than, if we can just take a moment to come out of our impact and just recognize it as is, like there is something going on here. There's something going on with that person, that person, that person. And if we do the stats, our anxiety levels are all going up. So there must be something in the mechanism in which we're impacted, but I would say even more so in the environment that's impacting us. So therefore, if we look at mental health, we can go one of two ways with this, and I think it's a bit of both. But let's just look at it either or for a second. The first one is where a lot of I believe our societal and collective understanding and perception of mental health is that it's within the individual to go and sort out.
Yes.
So what's the underlying coordinates of that? The underlying coordinates are you're not resilient. You are a bit broken.
Yeah.
You don't know how to do this stuff. So it's all on the individual. Yeah, I have a lot more confidence in the human being. Just the way we're wired up and what have you. And I think we are resilient, so therefore we do react to stuff like a canary bird in a mine shaft. And so therefore, I do believe that we're incredible beings, and I do believe in our capability. So if if so many people are firing up and mental health issues, suicide and this, that and the other, then, and it's becoming widespread, then at what point do we go, hang on a minute, it can't be because we're all fucked.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
There's got to be the way we're doing it
Yes.
is a bit fucked.
Yes. Yes.
So then it becomes an appropriate response
Yes.
to the fact that the way that we're doing it, in our collective imaginary, in our collective understanding, in our systems on a community to a national to a global level.
Yeah.
And some of those key ways that we're structured and organized, how we do stuff, we are the canary bird in our own mine shaft.
Yeah.
And so therefore, it is an appropriate response.
I love it. Yeah. So this really leads into the third reframe of resilience.
Yeah.
Which I think couples very, very closely with that. I think
I've got goosebumps now.
I think we use it as a resilience, that is, as an easy and convenient excuse not to deal with systemic issues.
Oh.
So if I can say to you, if I'm the CEO of this entity, and I can say to you, what you need, Bryn, is more resilience. So let's grab some sort of resource to make you more resilient. Then I can kind of mentally tick off that I've solved that problem of duress. Well, it's very easy for me whilst doing that to put the blinkers on and not go, hang on a minute, we're doing a whole heap of things systemically that's creating the duress for our people. So sometimes I think we use that resilience, adaptability frame as an excuse not to look at the bigger and more complex and more difficult issue. Yeah. Sometimes I think, well, just make your systems easier to navigate. Take some of the complicated. So I love some of the stuff that Tyson Younger Porter's been saying about the difference between complexity and complicated.
Yes.
Where he says complicated is what we make it. Complexity is, a really intricate weaving of many, many different factors and players in the environment. We often make things way more complicated than they need to be. And I think we're seeing that in the conversation around mental health right now. Part of the reason that stigma is such a big deal still, it's very hard for people to raise and speak about mental health openly, especially in the workplace. Partly that's because the complication is, well, it implicates you in exactly the way that you've just described. It says you are the thing that's broken. Yes. And as long as we can fix you, then all of this will be okay. Yeah. It also
it's a healthy ground for victimhood, isn't it?
Absolutely. Some of the conversations I've been having with leaders at various levels, they're kind of going, we recognise that we need to have conversations about this with our staff, but in the back of their mind is the question, I'm feeling duress, and if I start to talk to you about yours, that just compounds mine. And so the complicated nature of it is where we're starting, part of the narrative is well, if you're feeling the pressure and so am I, then we're double
We're all
stuffed.
fucked. We're all doomed.
Yeah, that's right. Rather than going,
Well, so then we all carry on.
yeah,
And it's like,
so don't look at that.
Don't look at that.
Don't look at that.
And you've actually now described exactly the characteristics of what went on at boarding school for me, because I spoke to a guy last year about the basically boarding school syndrome.
Yep.
Which was interesting, and it's exactly this. It's like, I'm 8 years old. I'm now in this strange bloody environment. All I want to do is cry, right? But I'm not, and I know but I'm not going to let that on. And then the next person is in the same boat, and everyone's in the same boat.
Yeah.
So we all just shut down and carry on and deal with it.
Yeah.
And so, particularly resilience for a long time for me. That's why I wanted to ask you about the sort of different inner definitions that people functionally operate of. Is because for a long time to me, resilience was almost like a shield.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
The fucking duress in the world can come at me, and it's like, bang, there you go. Stiff British upper lip.
Yeah.
Take some of that. Watch me. Like,
yeah.
And then not realizing and thinking, I'm all right. Not realizing that, I drink quite a bit. And, and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And so a large amount of transition for me in the last several years has been to drop the shield.
Yes.
Drop the armor.
Yeah.
And allow it to come through anyway, and recognize I am a human, so I am going to get battered around by stuff. And I am going to be impacted.
Yeah.
And that's okay.
Yes.
So I'm not going to stop with this bullshitty story that I don't get impacted. I'm
Nothing
all right.
to see here.
Nothing to see here.
Yeah.
My fucking shield's good.
Yeah.
So that in itself, just those realizations, big drop of anxiety out of the system, which I didn't even realize I was carrying around.
Right. Yeah.
And then after that, it's like, okay, so some days shit's going to knock me around.
Yeah.
And it's going to get untidy in the system of Bryn.
Yeah.
But I've started to develop in the tools to what can help me gracefully come back to homeostasis.
Yes.
And then once that impact has been and passed,
Yeah.
I'm still in the situation.
Yeah.
But I'm not getting battered around anymore.
Yes.
So now, I've got a bit of space now.
Yeah. And I think that's each of us because we're human. We all have that journey, right? Moments of impact, things that knock us.
Oh, it still happens.
I don't believe that it's part of the challenge with that. If we're resilient, things will be easy, or if we're courageous, we'll never feel fear. Part of the problem with that narrative is that we kind of build this illusion that there's some obtainable imperviousness.
Yes.
Where things will come at us and we'll just go,
yeah.
And it's almost like that shielding version is playing out that illusion.
Yeah.
Oh, that just bounced off the shield, nothing to see here. I think we do that collectively as well. So in microcosms like families and communities and organisations, and probably globally, but I don't have a high enough position on the hill to be able to recognise that. We play out that same narrative. So like you say, with the boarding school, emotion is contagious in humans, and how we collectively view things and deal with things is really that's infectious. And intentional culture, I think, looks at how do we develop some of that certainty inside of ourselves. That it's inside me and it's inside us collectively, whether that's just you and I or whether that's a bigger collective experience, so that we know we can rely on each other to some degree, regardless of what happens out there.
Yes.
And there's some great models for that. So I've got a proposition that is, I think one of the good, easily visible working models of that is, something like a small unit of elite special force soldiers. And I think these metaphors are useful up to a point, because at one level they're just like us, and at another level they're a completely different animal.
And then we're disappearing back into shields. And
yeah, that's right. But one of the ways that those teams operate that is highly effective is that they know beyond a shadow of a doubt that if that person's role is to guard our rear, they don't have to be looking over their shoulder. They know the rear is guarded.
Yeah, it's all good.
It's all good. That person is doing what they're supposed to do.
Yeah.
I can rely on it without question.
Again, think there's a reduction of anxiety in your system.
If there's an issue with that, they're going to tell me. They're not going to try and put the thing up and go, everything's good back here.
I want something.
They're going to say, hey, we've got a problem, or I've got a problem, and so we need to resolve that. They've got a way of reorganising themselves very, very quickly in moments of deep pressure where the consequences are life and death, around certainty of how we will respond. And they drill there's a great little clip from a guy called Rourke Denver, who's an ex-Navy SEAL commander. You can find it on YouTube. He talks about calm is contagious. So they drill into Navy SEAL commanders. Calm is contagious.
Yeah.
And effectively what they're saying, look, whether things are going to go pear-shaped, and if the leadership is running around unspooling, then the whole thing unspools.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there are ways that we can collectively bring our attention to our culture, and this is everything from individual level, micro team level, organisational concept, us as a father, son, parent, us as a part of a family unit, us as a part of a community, us as a part of a global system. We can bring that sort of thinking, I think, to say, well, okay, how do we show up in ways that our certainty comes from how we show up, not from what's going on around us. And that doesn't mean that what's going on around us will be easy, just that we've got a level of, in the book I called it unshakability, a level of we know we've got this. It'll get untidy, it'll get messy, there will be impact, there'll be all of that, but collectively we've got this. I know what I can call on you for. I know how you will show up. You know how I will show up. That's really useful. And my sense is from the bits of reading that I've done and conversations that I've had, that's not dissimilar. It's a bit of a turning back to how we turned up in villages and small farming communities and indigenous hunter-gatherer societies, where the environment was inherently uncertain, and there was a deep acknowledgement of that in the culture. At the moment, I think we try to fool ourselves that it won't be uncertain, that we'll have this clear road. Let's set a goal, it's out there, and we'll just go straight line to it. Okay, so that's delusional.
And we'll sit and we'll computer model a map, and that'll just tickety-boo.
Yeah. And we tie things like identity and purpose and some really quite deep-seated stuff to things like roles and achievement and those kinds of things, which are very, very, they're easily impacted.
Yes.
COVID's shown us that, if it's shown us nothing else.
Well, yeah, I mean, I spoke last year about how I used the analogy of our identity takes maintenance, and often, and we all do it, and we don't realise we're doing it, that our identity is built with like these external structures to hold it in place. And when the external structures get shaked or are taken away, then it can be like, ooh, here we go. And last year it was almost like, remove a lot of them.
Yes.
So you're right. So when that sense of identity, belief, core values, purpose, and all of that, which helps us shape the little enclave, which we know as us, individually, then that all becomes, that's why it becomes an existential crisis.
Absolutely, yeah, because then suddenly, and I had a patch of last year where I dove pretty deep into that particular well. It's like, okay, what's going on? Because from a business point of view, I have historically been able to see the value of what I bring to the marketplace because I'm in front of live audiences delivering it, and you can see moments of epiphany, you can see people nodding, you get insightful questions, all of that's happening live in front of you. And if it's not hitting the mark, you're also getting that feedback. You know, you've got an audience going, oh, well, the phone's more interesting right now. Or they're having a side conversation that's got nothing to do with what's happening in the room. So there was that feedback. A lot of the personal tactics for resilience that I have, you know, I train fairly regularly in martial arts. So the martial arts gym was shut down because it's very physical, high contact. A lot of the people in that community are people that I value the conversations and the provocations with beyond the physical activity. So that was all shut down. So a lot of the mechanisms that I used to triangulate myself and my value were gone. And there was a period where I was saying to one of my mentors, you know, it actually feels at the moment as though everything is forced labour. And he said, well, what's going on there? Because that's not the kind of energy I've historically got from you. And as we talked through it, I had felt as though I had completely discoupled from my purpose. And so everything that I was doing was like, this feels like a strain. Whereas when, for me at least, when action is coupled to purpose, the action doesn't feel as though it requires effort. It absolutely does. The amount of work involved is exactly the same, but the work feels light.
Yes.
And it feels relevant and it feels meaningful, and so the labour feels irrelevant.
Yeah.
As opposed to this feels like dragging a bloody great big anchor chain up a hill with no real no visibility of what the top of the hill is or why I've got this thing in the first place. You know. So I reckon there's things that we need to do that are kind of a circling back to that kind of community where we understand where our sense of certainty is internally driven. I said in an article last week, the only certainty that counts is the certainty we can create, because it sure as hell ain't coming from the external environment. And I don't believe that it will anytime soon. You know, you look at any potential source of disruption, whether it's natural disasters, whether it's things like global pandemics, whether it's technological evolution, whether it's competitors entering the market, whether it's the more individually micro-focused things like bankruptcies, divorces, births, deaths, you know, whatever, then we're going to be disrupted. And I think that the scale and the speed at which those things show up seems to be getting more and more common. You know, we've seen in Australia in the last 12 months many events that are 100-year events. You know, and they've been, it's like, well, we've had 12 months of those where we've just got out of one, and here's another one, here's another one, here's another one. And some of them are the same type of event, you know, like Queensland, I think, had 3 100-year flood events in 5 years. So, well, that wasn't 100 years, and we've had 3 of them. So I think that level of disruption will continue to grow. So we need to, in my belief, find ways of developing certainty amongst us rather than in reference to the external circumstances.
And doing that in a way that is both individual and yet...
and collective.
Shared, yes. Because the real delicate part I get concerned about is when we start looking at our internal capabilities or doing work on ourselves or personal development, it becomes an incredibly individualistic pursuit.
Yes.
Which on one level is great.
Yes.
Because we all need to sweep our own house up. And we need to, what was it I read once? We all need to, attend to the wounds that we picked up so we don't continue to bleed upon the world.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
But at the same time, if we disappear too far into ourselves, then
Yes.
you're just going to end up with a lot of individuals
Yeah.
that don't know how to genuinely interact with
Yes.
others.
Yes.
And also, you're not, to continue the analogy, unless we go into battle together or we go in to do something together, then I'm not going to really truly know that you're going to show up. We can do all the training, and over that time we can build up that, and then we will go into battle. I think it's interesting as you were saying that, I've, anyone who's played team sports, I think most people will have been in a team where you rely on everyone to do the job. It means you can just do yours.
Yes.
And everyone's been in one where there's a couple of weak links where you're like, I used to play rugby, so it's like, fuck, he's on the team, which means I'm going to have to do more than my fair shares of tackles today.
Or the opposite extreme of that, where you've got the superhero that wants all the glory and
and wants to do everyone's tackles. So you get those imbalances. So I really like that analogy, but I think it's that I'm quite sensitive at the moment of the over focus on individuality.
I agree. Yeah.
And that's paradoxical, which you talk about in your books. Being all right with paradoxes.
Yeah.
It is so important for us to clean our own house up inside.
Yes.
But recognise man is not an island. Otherwise, we disappear into this narcissistic fucking.
Well, there's two streams in there.
Yeah,
I think one is the narcissistic stream. We get this overinflated sense of importance.
Yeah.
And again, Tyson Yunker Porter's got some great stuff to say about that. Where he says in Indigenous communities, one of the significant elements of those is to find and beat out narcissistic tendencies in a way that reforms people. So it's not punishment. He's very clear about that. And I think the words he uses are, you are not special, but you are part of something special.
Yes. Yes.
And he speaks about that moment that you realise that, where your first thought is, what do you mean I'm not special? That's terrible. And then very quickly you go, that also means no one else is either.
Yeah.
So that's okay.
That's all cool.
And this is really important. So or really special. So I think that's one road, is we go down the narcissistic, it's all about me, it's all about either my untidiness or it's all about my aspiration. The other potential road there is that we collectively load each other up, which is, that's an echo back to an earlier point in the conversation, where we say, Bryn, the whole of this responsibility lies with you.
Yes.
If you can't sort yourself out, if you can't be resilient, courageous, blah, 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 then we're all screwed. So, get on with it, mate.
Yeah.
Get it sorted. And it's an unrealistic burden to put onto each other, where we end up in these little microcosms of it's me here and you there, dealing with our internal and external experience of the world, and there's very little of that joining up. And when we do join up, it tends to be either defensive or adversarial, rather than let's stand shoulder to shoulder and face that way and go that way together. Recognising that there'll be times where I've got this and I'll be dragging you along a bit, and there'll be other times where it's the other way around, and that's okay.
And the challenge I find is that, dialing back to other parts that we were talking about earlier on, is that you stick that in an organisational setting. Most of the systems are not set up to encourage that, because, particularly for some of the larger management consultancies I worked for in my time, I know that at one point during the year that there's going to be an assessment of Bryn versus mine, and that could be the difference between whether I get a 10 grand pay rise or you get a 10. One of us is going to get it. Right. So therefore, I'm encouraged to collaborate with you, but stick my nose ahead at the same time, right? And that's not fucking collaborating.
No.
That's not
No.
bringing the team together.
Yeah.
And so it's just competitiveness.
Yes.
And this is where, coming from the, doing the study of the business psychology masters and being the management consultant for several years, but always being a humanist at the same time, which is why I've ended up doing the podcast. It used to
must have been hard for
you.
you.
Yeah, it fucking crushed me a lot of the time. And I couldn't understand why. It's like, oh, for fuck's sake, we'll just play together. But then after years, you just have to give in to you have to give in to the understanding that in its current format, this ain't going. We can try our best. I was talking about this morning, I was listening to, we talked about integral theory, and a guy called Jamie Wheel tried to set up an integral management consultancy, but then the first thing all the leaders of the operation said was, oh, Teal, how do I get there as quickly as possible?
Yeah.
Right? Teal being the ultimate level of development. It's like, it's a competition now. I need to be there because I know that will make me better and I'll get paid more. It's like, fuck.
Yeah.
Now we're not encouraging this shit.
Yes.
That is so important.
Yes. Yeah. And I think that speaks to the sort of dominant frames and systems that we think through. So we tend to view, this is both a superpower and a problem, right?
Yeah.
There's the superpower of us being able to frame the world in a particular way and operate from that frame in ways that are very often highly successful is absolutely a human superpower. And at the same time, those frames can become things that bind us. And that's a really great example. We're trying to actually put something that's quite dramatically different into play.
Yeah.
And what we end up doing is just subverting it to the frame anyway.
Yeah.
So
yes.
We've changed the colours and we've changed the levels, but we're still playing this competitive
How can I get
dog
the
eat
ladder
dog
quicker?
game. Yeah. And there's only so much room at the top, and so it better be me, not you. And it's interesting. I think that stuff is. I don't have easy answers for how that's resolved. I don't know. I think there's a lot of both complexity and complication attached to that.
Indeed.
But I think they're questions we need to be asking. And for me, COVID has really provoked that thinking.
Yeah.
That, I think it's been easy-ish in the world pre-COVID to both buy into and maintain the illusion of control, that that the environment around us will largely conspire in our favour, and we can set outcomes and we can go towards them and we can get them, and there's a level at which that's absolutely true. And then something like COVID comes along, and the vast majority of us were caught absolutely flat-footed. So I didn't see that coming. Had no idea that was even possible. Someone blarred a bit about bird flu a while back, but it didn't seem to be a thing. And,
never got going.
Here we are. So it shows us, I think, in an undeniable, you can't avoid the reality that actually the amount of control that we've got over the external environment is pretty low.
Yes.
What we can control is all of this stuff internal, internal to me, internal to our interactions, how we collectively interact with the other entities around us, how we collectively interact with the circumstances around us. And, we were talking earlier about, I think this is a looping back to how humans have historically done stuff, in villages, farms, tribes. We kind of did that. It's like we know our roles. We have an easy way of shifting accountability and responsibility depending on, whether the thing we need most right now is a shaman or a hunter or a gatherer or a maker of things. And we deploy the best of ourselves individually and collectively in that effort, and ego's fairly low down the list. And
expectation, like we're talking about.
Exactly, it's very adaptive to whatever comes our way, both in terms of opportunities and challenges. So I reckon, I'd like to see this as a spiral where, it's not a case of, all right, let's go back to a village lifestyle. That's not realistic.
No.
But to recapture some of the essence of what we were in that kind of world and apply it to now when we are, genuinely global and so interconnected, and start to think about, okay, so what would that look like if we could if we could channel a bit of that, you know, if we could get back to that sort of sense of collective capability and essence, where, you know, it doesn't matter so much whether you're individually, whether you individually got this.
Yeah.
Together we have.
Yes.
And at some point you'll be carrying more load than I will, or you'll be adding more value than I will. But on the whole, that's okay. We're not keeping score directly against each other.
Our egos have dropped out of this a bit.
Yeah. So, you know, I might give you food today, and tomorrow you might give food to somebody else, and that's okay. It'll come back around. You know, someone will come and put a fire out at my joint eventually, and that's all seen as okay.
Yeah.
Rather than this straight transaction always, you know.
And you can, and I really like this. Trusting those around you, that they will look after you. Yeah. That you can contribute, but at the same time, they will look after you as well. The interview with Thomas Bjorkman about the Nordic secret, which I told you about earlier on. One of the key things in that book is that if you look at the Scandinavian countries, there's a high level of trust amongst citizens, amongst themselves and with designated authorities. Yes. They'll be doing the right thing. He's doing the right thing. Yes. We're all doing the right thing. Yeah. A lot of that's eroded, hasn't it?
I think so. There's an inherent suspicion. It was really interesting. I was having a conversation with a client a couple of days ago. I was on the train down to Freo to meet with another client, and I said, he said, there's a bit of background noise. Is it a good time to talk? And it's like, yeah, it's all good. I'm on the train. And he said, oh shit, are you okay? It's like there's this inherent threat about being on public transport, and it's like, mate, I catch trains a lot, and so far it's all been fine. You know, there's an interesting assortment of characters on here, but I'm not at risk. So there's that, I think, a bit of inherent suspicion of our default footing is more likely to see you as foe than friend. And I think we've got to be careful with trust. We shouldn't just dish it out willy-nilly, but I reckon there's more to be trusted than not in the majority of people.
And to actively look for that.
Yeah.
Because if you're going into most interactions with the base assumption that I generally don't trust people. Yeah. Prove me otherwise.
Yes. I put a quote in the book. I can't remember who said it, but I put it in at the start of the chapter about trust. The quote was, the best way to find out if someone is trustworthy is to trust them.
Yes.
I thought, that's gold.
That is. I love that.
It's gold. It actually requires to prove your trustworthiness requires an investment from me.
Yeah. So it's there.
Yeah.
If you shit on it, then that'll be that. But it was there from the start.
Yeah. I thought that's a really useful frame, because I think we often we often operate from a default lack of trust. It's like, I prove I can trust you.
Yeah.
We saw that a bit in, I don't know, in the people you've been talking to, but on the whole, there was a massive uptick in trust in organisations with the whole work from home thing, because all of a sudden we've got to trust that you'll come back here. Yeah. And you'll get on with what you're supposed to be doing
and
for us.
And you're doing stuff while you're at home.
You're not sitting on Netflix and perfecting your sourdough recipe. You're actually applying yourself to your work. And on the whole, we did that, I think, really well. And there was a bit of an uptick in trust, perceived trust in organisations. There were some people where the opposite was true. It's like, I want to check in with you every hour because I've got to make sure you're working, and, you might be slacking off, and it did the exact opposite. It kind of eroded that.
Well, that kind of infantilizes people, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
Because what's the underlying coordinates of that? You can't be trusted, much like kids.
Yes.
So we're just going to have to check up on you.
Yeah.
Okay, Daddy, Mummy.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it becomes, a bit like the
go.
calm is contagious thing. It's you seed trust and it grows, and the more you see it in action, the more reliable it becomes. And largely that's just an unspoken agreement between us.
Yeah.
But the more we test it, the more we find it to be true, and so the more reliable it becomes, the more certainty it builds between us. So that now when this comes along, it's like I don't have to look over my shoulder to see if Bryn's got my back. I just know he is.
It's just there, yeah.
And if he's not, he'll tell me.
Yeah.
And we only know that because we built that up. It's like the rugby team drilling the set plays to the point that when they're on the field and they're under pressure, they can flick off a no look pass and know that guy's there.
Correct.
And the only reason they know that is they've built that pattern over and over again.
I know one of my dudes will be there.
They know how fast that ball has to travel. They know exactly where he'll be. They've got a peripheral view of the opposition in front of them only, and it's an instinctive act based on, I know you're there. And it looks magical.
Yes.
But it's built on, we've tested this. It's not
effortless.
Exactly.
A bit like you, right at the start you were saying resilience makes things look effortless.
Yeah. It has that appearance, but the appearance is an illusion, an external illusion, because those guys know how much blood, sweat and tears is put into that.
Yeah.
It's not like
passes beforehand.
You can't just turn up and make that happen. You don't just switch it on or switch it off. It's like, quick, resilience training so we can do that.
Yeah, because I guess that's one of the questions I've got now, and you sort of mentioned it earlier on in that, probably now, let's stay in Western Australia.
Yeah.
Given that we have a bit of breathing space.
We sort of have to. Everywhere else is locked in. Yeah. They won't let us travel.
Yeah, not many other people can talk about breathing space right now. Because we do have the breathing space to look back now and go... Because it almost strikes me that resilience is not one of these things where we do resilience training. We have to do almost be curious about how we learn, how we grow, our human journey, and being all right with that. And then resilience comes as a consequence. Probably needs a bit of resilience light chucked in there, but it's not just resilience for resilience sake.
Yeah.
It's resilience comes as a consequence of being more solid in ourselves.
Yeah.
So with that, now we have the space, because like you said, there's no point chucking resilience training in there when you're in the thick of it. It's like you're at the starting line, like you said. Are you starting to see people being more drawn to the things that will bring about more resilience? Or are we now going, oh, it's over, sweep it on the carpet, let's see if we can get back to that chill on the game?
I reckon I'm seeing both. So,
yeah,
and I'm seeing both at an individual level and at a collective level as well, and sometimes simultaneously. So if I look at myself as a microcosm of that, we were talking before we started about, this last couple of weeks has been the busiest period in my business since the first lockdown in Western Australia. And a lot of stuff that I was doing back then is coming back online, and I'm on a pretty steep, ramp up again of delivery capability, really. And I can see in myself a temptation to discard some of the things that I was doing that feed my resilience through the quieter period, and that kind of kept me together when I was hunting around for what's the purpose, why am I dragging this chain up the hill. I can see how readily I could just go, okay, I don't need that now, I've got to focus on transaction, go, do.
Yeah.
And there's a part of me that says, I've got to really watch that, because I could easily put myself into a position where I have overplayed my transactional hand, lost touch with that, and I've got to try and scaffold this back in now because I've created my own duress.
Yes.
And I'm seeing that also in organisations, I think. There's a...
Can you give me an example?
Well, I think the mental health conversation is a good one, where a lot of organisations, when, and sticking to the WA context, when we were doing a lot more. We have to work from home. There is no choice in that. I think there was quite a bit of, certainly among my clients, intentional check-in. You know, how you're travelling, what's going on, acknowledgement that you are not only an employee of this place, but there's an ecosystem that lives behind you. And we can kind of see that because your kid will bomb the Zoom meeting and your bull terrier's ripping a sofa apart in the background, and you know, your partner comes home from wherever, and you know, all of that stuff is happening in the context of work. Yeah. And as we're getting...
Your whole life shows up in a Zoom meeting.
Yeah, that's right. It's
which
like,
we tend to try and ignore. Oh, you're here wearing the embroidered top, so you're just doing work, and I don't want to know about the stuff behind.
That's right. And despite the green screen and the beautiful sort of organised office, there's these random entities inserting themselves into the picture.
Yeah.
I think there's a bit of a sense of some people are wanting to just get back to normal.
Yeah.
Now, and that's compelling. I think it's one of the biggest risks that we have right now is, all right, well, that's past, let's just go back to normal, and that we actually lose potentially all of the insight from the last 12 months, because we just go, all right, let's just hop straight back into the familiar patterns of everything. I reckon it'd be good if we can kind of balance some of those, and you know, I can certainly recognise in myself and in the people I'm talking to, there's a tension there. You know, at one level, it's kind of nice to just go back into the groove. And at another level, it's like, okay, well, we need to make that groove more expansive somehow, and you know, keep that Zoom background picture running even when we're face to face. I think one of the things that showed up, you know, we saw these interesting polarities. So you mentioned the toilet roll fiasco in Western Australia before. You know, we saw that kind of behaviour where we're, you know, pretty much at gladiatorial conflict with each other in the supermarket car park over who gets the 36 rolls and who goes home with a dirty bum, and on the other hand, deep care for each other at a level that I don't think that we've seen collectively expressed for a good while. Yeah. Or at least not in our cities. And those things almost operating as extreme juxtapositions. It's like, what? How's that working out? And I reckon we need to keep sight of that. You know, we can easily be drawn into that highly reactive territory of, things are moving, I need to quickly, you know, latch onto whatever I need to make sure I'm okay and stuff the rest of you.
Yes.
We all have that, you know, we can all do that.
We get triggered.
And then at the other end, we can do the collective thing really well as well. So let's try and keep hold of that, I think. Try and keep them both in view and acknowledge that both are ever present. You know, it doesn't necessarily take a set of circumstances to bring them to bear. We can create that internally, which comes back to some of that certainty we were talking about. You know, if we start to empty the metaphoric toilet roll aisle, then everyone that walks down it is getting twitchy, and if they're seeing people stockpiling, it's back to the calm is contagious thing. It's like, the herd is moving. I better.
Something's got to happen.
Ooh, you know. So I think the more we can keep that stuff visible, the more likely we are to get to some of those larger systemic realizations and possibly be able to scaffold that with some really good, you know, interpersonal, individual and more collective expressions of humanity that build a sense of certainty regardless of what's coming down the pipe at us.
I really like that. Have we covered most of the topics in the book?
I reckon
in one form or another.
I reckon we kind of have, yeah. So
because this was what I found interesting about this is You've done kind of what I do here, from my understanding. You went and spoke to a lot of people.
Yeah.
And then drew a pattern.
Yeah. So there were kind of a few things happening in parallel. So when I wrote my first book, Thrive and Adapt, back in 2017, it's interesting. You go through that process and almost immediately there's some evolution of thinking.
Yeah.
Because the process of writing it down and making it digestible to another person forces you to shape it and deeply consider it and question it, and you get editors going, well, you're banging on here for 3 pages and I got no idea what you just said. So, okay, that was really clear in my head, so back to the drawing board.
Yep, right.
Either it's not a thing or I just haven't articulated it well. So you kind of go through that process, and it's an interesting process because you are forced to externalise a lot of the thinking that you would otherwise just be doing internally. And you're attempting to do that in a way that's digestible for somebody else, which means that you reach a level of personal clarity about it that you couldn't achieve readily via another mechanism, I think.
Yes.
So I wrote the first book, and then I had this one on the drawing board, and it's largely been a matter of courage to write it. So I could have written it pretty much off the back of the other one, but it was like, it just feels, there was a sense for me of it would very easily add to the screaming noise of pop psychology, where, it's like, here's something that sounds great but is nothing of substance.
Yes. There's a shit ton of that.
There is plenty of it. And I thought, I really don't want this book to be that. And there was a part of me that says, well, who am I to say anything about this anyway? Because of all the sorts of things we've been talking about. I'm impacted by plenty of stuff, and there's moments where the wheels fall off entirely, and times where my partner and even some of my clients point to a chapter in my first book and go, you should read this, You can't argue against that, So it's like, well, who am I to tell people about unshakability? The beauty of COVID was there was a bit of a wondering for me about moments of impact and what they looked like. And there was a sense of, look, I know we experience these things. We're all vulnerable to them. COVID came along and it's like, right, we're collectively, globally experiencing one right now. If there's not a time to write this book, when is the time?
Yeah.
So that was a real trigger. And the second thing around the interviews was I was acutely aware that many of the leaders and organisations and teams that I've worked with over the last sort of, best part of a decade were all at once experiencing their own version of a moment of impact as a result of the circumstance of COVID. And for some businesses, like mine, that was a total flat line. You've gone from a trajectory of growth and lots of good stuff happening to beep. Holy cow,
Yeah.
And on the other hand, so anyone in the event space, that was their experience. On the other hand, a lot of my clients are not-for-profit health providers and aged care and disability providers, and their world went bonkers. Their workloads were off the scale compared to what they've ever been. And with substantial uncertainty, I remember talking to one CEO who was saying, we're down to a 2-week supply of masks and gloves in our business. And if we run out, we've still got to provide, really intimate personal care to our clients. And that significantly lifts the risk to our staff and to our other clients. So we're in this thing of what do we do? And it was a real probability that they would run out of that stuff. And at that point, the impact of COVID was still very unknown. So they're going, are we effectively sending our staff to, potential very real risk of physical harm and or death as a question mark, and yet not being able to go, we'll just turn all of our 24/7 services off because, that elder of our community will be able to probably get by on their own. It's just not an option. Yeah. So in their world, the pressure to deliver was immense, and in other people's world, the pressure to deliver had completely gone.
Yeah.
And it's like, how am I even going to put food on the table tomorrow? particularly pre some of the government initiatives that have happened here to support that. So the interview process was to ask those various leaders across a big range of sectors. So I spoke to people in government at some fairly senior levels, small business operators, some large publicly listed companies, some of those not-for-profits in the sort of community support services sort of space, and a bit of a mix of people in between. And I said, look, do you mind if I just chew your ear about what are you experiencing as a leader right now, and how are you kind of navigating the deep uncertainty? And I think because of COVID, there was a authenticity and transparency in those conversations that may not have been there had I been asking them about an impact in just their business.
Yeah, it might have been a bit more of a front.
Yeah, you'd get the kind of sanitised for public consumption version.
Yeah. Whereas
people were just saying, look, here's how it is. And, you know, those conversations were profound. You know, some of them we were weeping together, some of them we were laughing together, some of them we were speculating about potential futures and, you know, how do you triangulate and make decisions when the amount of unknown is way exceeding the amount of known, and it's rapidly moving. So, you know, the basis for a decision on Friday could be completely redundant by Monday. How do you keep that cadence up without, you know, cooking yourself and the people around you? So there's really rich conversations about all of that. And what started to emerge was some very key themes about how people were navigating that correlated very strongly with my survival experience. So there's a whole world of psychology that comes out of survival where they talk about the survivor personality. So people who do well against the odds, you know, whether they get a dire medical diagnosis, whether they get a bankruptcy, a divorce, whether they're lost or stranded in the outback, whether they're in a combat zone, either as a military personnel or civilian, you know, all these various experiences of deep duress. The survivor personality is kind of a set of traits that allow people to typically beat the odds, you know, and there's an element of luck there. You know, you're sometimes just underneath the bomb and sometimes a block away, and that's good enough. But there are attributes that sort of allow people to show up and get clarity and direction and take action that stack the deck in their favour. And a lot of those things were correlating with what leaders were telling me. One of the beauties of it was that there was a real sense that for some people were going, right, here's the thing, here's a piece of territory that I know beyond a shadow of a doubt positively impacts this.
Yes.
And they were actively deploying that. There were other times where they're going, there's a sense of something kind of fuzzy here that I reckon is important, and I'm sort of trying to drag understanding out of that gloom and deploy that. And there were other times where it's like, I'm just totally winging it. I've got no idea. And so that sort of spectrum of understanding and capability to deploy things was really variable. So I'd speak to you and you'd be really strong in this channel, but no, I hadn't even considered this one. So there wasn't a single person that had all of it.
Yeah.
Or who couldn't develop something to a greater degree. And so we tried in the book to codify all of that and give primarily what and why, you know, what do you need to develop and why, and not too much how.
Yeah.
Partly because I think that's a personal journey and a contextual journey. And partly because I think it's, you know, it's probably a doorstop and another book. But yeah, it was useful insight. I think that thing of testing thinking, you know, and we've done it a bit today, where you kind of go, here's what I'm noticing, and you go, oh, here's what I'm noticing, and it's like, there's a third thing that emerges from noticing that and noticing that. Yeah. And sometimes there's a bigger context that third thing sits in.
Yes.
That process is really valuable.
Yeah.
I think I've got some pretty good thinking in my own right, but it's way stronger when I triangulate it against others.
Yes.
And that's part of that collective certainty that I think we've been talking about.
Yeah. And as I mentioned before, that's kind of where I'm taking this podcast now too. Instead of it's just you and me, it's you and me talking, creating a third.
Yeah.
And then that's got exciting. And, there was a bit earlier on, I think I mentioned it, where I can't remember what bit we were talking about, but it was like, ooh.
Yes. Yeah.
Hair standing on the back of my arm. I'm like, ooh, there you go.
Yeah.
We're in something at the moment.
Yeah. Absolutely. And then, you start to get other people interacting with that moment and adding their knowledge to it and their perspective to it and furthering the dialogue, which I think is really powerful. Yeah. For me, if I had one sort of hope for us collectively out of COVID, it would be that we deepen the collective conversation.
Yes.
And I don't know that we're in a position that we would ever abandon the transactional stuff right now. I think that's so sort of built into our systems, but I think it'd be really cool if, as a result of this, we started to talk more about how do we build a collective experience that's more robust and that's less vulnerable to external circumstances, and that almost has that footing of throw whatever you like at us, we've got this.
Yeah, let's have a play with it.
Yeah. And, inevitably there'll be times, the reason I put the in unshakable in brackets is, we are all deeply shakeable.
Exactly.
Individually and collectively.
And that's okay too.
And I reckon that needs to be acknowledged for our unshakability to have any value at all.
So the last question I ask my guests nowadays, since the last time you were on, hypothetical question, but I always enjoy the answer, is if I could just chill everyone out for 5 or 10 minutes, right, and Mike House could upload a question into the collective consciousness, so everyone just sat and considered or journaled out for that 5 or 10 minutes while they're chilling out their answer to that question, what would it be?
Ooh, what a great question. Feels like it'll take 5 or 10 minutes for the cogs to spool up on that. I actually think that I've been saying for a while that there's a distinction between positions that are inherently black and white, right or wrong, good or bad, and effective versus ineffective. So the question would probably be, what can you do as subset one, and then what can we do in whatever our collective experience is to shift the dialogue from good, bad, right, wrong, black, white, which is inherently adversarial, into what would be more effective. That would help us, I think, to elevate beyond the question of, is resilience a thing we need to plug into you so you can do better, or is it a systems thinking thing it's actually both. So how can we effectively do that? Would help us to get beyond, how do we deal with that? You and I are trying to compete for a limited space there to how can we collectively make this more for more of whatever the measure is for all of us, more safe, more abundant, more clear, more healthy, more, whatever that is. What would be more effective?
Yes, like it. It's been great talking.
Likewise, Bryn, it's always generative and interesting. Love it.
So if people want to find you and get a copy of the book?
The best place to go is www.mikehouse.com.au. That's my website. It's got the book and a whole heap of other stuff there.
Yep.
And all my contact details are there too. So I'm always up for engagement and conversation around any of this. In my, sometimes that's commercial, but often it's just let's have a chat. I think that's really valuable. So I would encourage people to stalk me there and
reach out.
And by all means, if people want to grab a copy of the book, it can be found there, and feel free to reach out and have a broader conversation that springboards off this if they would like to.
Awesome. Thank you very much for your time.
Pleasure, Bryn. Thank you.